From the liberal Northeast comes a lone voice of truth. Honest commentary in dishonest times. Think deeper with Juan Newsom. This is the Cure radio program. This is the Cure.
Okay, folks, tonight we have a special guest. It's a good friend of mine. You may know him he does a series of appearances on Fox News, on shows like Tucker Carlson and Fox and Friends. He's also has his own movement, and, he is, the president of Unhyphenated America. Mr. Christopher Harris. How you doing, Chris? Thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, Juan. Good to talk to you again.
For your site, Chris, I like your mission statement. I've been checking your site out for quite a bit. And it speaks to the destructive forces of the day. You talk about identity politics, cultural Marxism, and those things that are practically, you look at what's going on today. You look at, not just culturally, but inside government and some of the American institutions, some of our traditional institutions. What brought you to that, what brought you to that mission statement? And, what inside did you made you want to fight, those forces? Those are very powerful forces. As they have, infiltrated, like I said, a lot of our institutions. So what made you take on this mission?
Well, I got to start with God, right? Because it wasn't something that I had this strong desire to do. Anyone who knows me or who has known me for a long time would tell you that this was not something that Chris wanted to do. I don't even like really going on television. I like having conversations with people, and so that's fine. And I have passionate views about things, but going on TV, radio's fine. Radio's fine because you get a chance to kind of let out and have a full discussion. But I've not really been a big fan of going on TV. It's a lot more pressure, and you're putting a face to a name, and that makes people want to hate you. But what brought me to it was, quite simply, God put it on my heart, and I had been doing enough research that this is something that needs to for someone to speak out about.
Yep.
And these ideas. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, these ideas, my life experiences growing up as a military brat, I was born and raised Air Force brat, lived overseas in Europe, specifically in Germany throughout the Cold War, and I had a chance to see things like socialism. So I have no doubt about how terrible socialism is because I've rode the train from Frankfurt to Berlin twice and got a chance to see what socialism was really like, meaning they have to put up a wall to keep people in, which on a sidebar is just laughable when people try to act like the wall that we want to put up here in America is a bad thing. I'm like, no, the wall we're trying to put up is trying to keep people out, just like you would put up a fence around your house to keep people out, not to keep people in.
Wow. That's some powerful imagery. So I guess that kind of, maybe that shaped you. Were you ever, because I know there's a lot of, when you look at the Brexit movement, and, a lot of my conservative friends, I talk to people like, C. O'Brien and so forth, and a lot of us were liberals prior to being conservative, especially being outspoken like conservatives. Were you ever, quote unquote, like a liberal, with that type of experience?
Well, that's the funny thing. I was a liberal. I don't think I was ever a leftist, because, when I talk about it now, I talk about leftists primarily. I don't even like to call them liberals because the root word of liberal is liberty, right? And there's nothing liberty minded about people on the left. But I was a little bit more liberal, I guess. And I would say honestly, Juan, that was because of the culture, and by the culture I mean the African American culture. And it really runs counter to the way I was raised, quite frankly. I was raised as, pro-America, bleed red, white, and blue. I said, my God, I was born and raised in the military. All I knew, even though my family's originally from Detroit, I've never lived in Detroit because literally weeks after I was born, we were traveling around the country and then eventually around the world with my father. So, my perspective on the world is a little bit different. And, I grew up seeing communism, but yet in my adult life, we left Germany right after I graduated from high school, literally like 8 days after I graduated from high school. We were on an airplane coming back stateside. And even though my family moved out to Colorado, and it's not like Colorado's a big mecca for black people, right? There's still enough, black people, and there's a culture there. And as I call it, the African American culture is a very strong pull. It's a very strong influence. And then you take somebody who's young, and in my particular case, life was not going as I thought it should go. It was not going as planned. And, I was an angry young man. I would say, literally, honestly, Juan, for the first 5 years out of high school, so basically from 18 to 22, 23 years old, I was an angry young man. Because I felt that life had gave me, dealt me a bad hand. And then what happens is that when the African American culture is one of grievance, at the end of the day, let's just push away everything else. The reality is the African American culture is one of grievance and victimhood. And, and it tells you that there's a boogeyman, and there's the reason why you're not as successful as you want to be ultimately is because of the evil white man. That's what they tell you. And, when you're young and you're angry and you're failing in life, well, rather than look in the mirror and take personal responsibility for where you are, for looking at the facts that, hey, I did this or that was stupid and I'm having to pay the price for that. You could point the finger at someone else and say, oh, you did this to me, or there's a system out there that's keeping me from being successful. And that's where I was up until I was 23 years old before I started making that change. And to make a long story short, basically I was a Democrat. I voted Democrat up until the age of 28. And then by the age of 30, I had left the DNC because, started noticing some things and doing some research. I left the DNC at the age of 30. I became a Republican at 32. And we get to credit POTUS 44, as I tend to refer to him. I don't like saying his name, but since we're on the radio, I'll say, we get to credit President Obama, more specifically for me being the staunch conservative that I am, because as I was doing my research, that guy epitomized and typified everything that I had researched and came to realize was wrong about leftism.
Yeah. I think I had a similar experience. It's kind of started in my teens, and just to make a long story short, my first vote was actually for a Republican, even though I consider myself a Democrat. But intellectually, it just I'm not an emotional type, feeler type person, but intellectually, the Democratic Party just didn't make sense, just because of the history. And when I started studying accounting in my undergraduate studies, I started to realize, hold on, these people are lying about taxes. Taxation was like one of my favorite subjects, specifically corporate taxation. I said, man, these people are lying about taxes. On top of that, I was already kind of, I didn't vote party line. I voted a lot. I actually voted for a lot of Republicans in my youth. But when I figured out they were lying about taxes, I told myself they're going to lie about the history, and they're going to lie about taxes, which affects your disposable income what wouldn't they lie about? You know, you're talking about your own personal income. They're passing policies that affect your income. You know, you look at the debt. Look how we're 20 plus trillion in debt and stuff now. Back then, it wasn't as bad. I think we're around 7 trillion. But if they're going to lie about something as, you know, personal as your personal income, you know, I really can't support this party. So I started kind of my shift there. And, you know, when you look at them today, you know, they're totally different than what they were then. At least there was somewhat of a mask on, you know. My grandfather, he was kind of conservative, but he was kind of stuck with the Democratic Party because he was a union boss and all this other stuff. And once your politics mix with your personal income and your finances, you're kind of stuck. You know, you're kind of stuck there. So he was really stuck with playing the game while secretly voting elsewhere, voting otherwise. So I look at this party today. I mean, they're totally unfringed. They're totally off the rails. You look at the incoming Congress, the new Congress, and you have Democrats have, you know, I guess 3 bright stars. I mean, you look at, you know, AOC.
They have nut bags is what they have. They got a couple of nut bags. Well,
look, the Democratic base think they have, you know, 3 shiny bright stars. I mean, these women are really dangerous. I mean, there's some dangerous rhetoric coming from them. When you talk about policy suggestions, you talk about this Green New Deal thing coming from AOC, which would practically bankrupt us and destroy the economy. But, you know, this thing, I'm scared. I'm personally scared. I went from, you know, maybe a little bit liberalism is okay to being totally freaked out. What's your take on these new incoming freshman congresswomen and where this may lead us for 2020? I'm interested to hear your take on that.
So I don't even like to see, the funny thing is, because of the whole identity politics thing,
mm-hmm.
I don't even like to talk about the fact that they are congresswomen.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say members of Congress.
Yep.
Because one of the things that they want to talk about, is one of the things they want to do to deflect, is they want to say, well, you're criticizing her because she's a woman.
Yep.
Or you're criticizing her because of her religious faith or whatever like that. And it's like, no, I'm criticizing her because she's a moron. That's it. Nothing more than that.
Yep.
But calling her a moron is being generous, because they're actually very, very wicked people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to echo your statement, yes, I'm scared. It's gone beyond concern. Yes, it is fear based on reality.
Yep.
You know, I know history all too well. You know, I like to talk about history all the time.
Absolutely.
I know the history of leftism. You know, and as I always type out or write out, leftist regressive socialist ideology. I mean, leftist is self-explanatory. I refer to them as regressives because they call themselves progressives. And if you understand history, you realize that there's absolutely nothing progressive about what they're talking about. Progressive is actually Christianity.
Yeah.
Progressive is actually a constitutional republic.
Yeah.
Those are progressive things, excuse me, that are rare in the world. What they're pushing for is to go back to a rule by the elite, which is the way things have been done forever and a day, pretty much every nation state in history outside of the United States. So yeah, they call themselves progressives. They're really regressives. And when I say socialist-minded people, yes, there's more and more people who are flat out saying that they're socialists, or they think socialism is fine. Yeah. And when people ask me, and it's funny what you mentioned about like how it used to be, oh, well, maybe a little bit. I went on a nice little rant the other day, which I'm prone to do. You know, people laugh because I'm like, yeah, I'll be posting puppy videos and food videos and travel videos, and then I'm going to go on a rant You know, just drop bombs on people, right? Then I'll go back to puppies and food. But yeah, I went on a nice little rant the other day about moderate Republicans. And I don't know if you saw that, but, you know, I really was just kind of asking the question of moderate Republicans, like, well, what are you hoping to accomplish?
Yep.
You're sitting there saying, like, well, I don't like the extreme. And I'm like, but yet we're getting more and more extreme from the left.
Yeah.
So, like, it used to be, for example, that we would say, hey, you know what? We'll take the LGBT QRSTUVWXYZ issue, right, with them, because, you know, there's always a new letter being added.
Yeah.
That, you know, they just wanted to be left alone.
Yeah.
And we reached the point where, like, you know what, first of all, it's not like there were huge numbers of people just going out there randomly attacking homosexuals. Even the most high-profile cases were lies. You know, I forgot the guy's name, the one that Daniel something or whatever his name is. They were like, oh, yeah, he was attacked for being gay. No, it was a drug deal that went bad.
Yeah.
But yet the left actually has taken that guy and lionized him and turned him into a saint, when the reality is it was simply a drug deal that got, I think it was Matthew. Anyway, it was a drug deal that went bad. He wasn't beaten because he was gay. He was beaten because he was a drug user and drug dealer, and, you know, there was something went wrong with the deal, and he just happened to also be gay. But as Rahm Emanuel once said, that, you know, never miss an opportunity to turn something out of to take something, take advantage of a crisis, rather.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, they created one. Hey, this is a perfect opportunity, just like what happened with Jussie Smollett. I mean, they're like, hey, we'll create an opportunity. Absolutely. So we would say, hey, you know what? Listen, I don't agree with your lifestyle, which is not the same thing as saying I hate you or I want to cause you any harm. At the end of the day, if you are heterosexual, especially if you're a Christian, there's no way for you to agree with the homosexual lifestyle. Does that mean you hate them? No, that doesn't mean you hate them. Does that mean if you're an American and a constitutional conservative that you say that they should be deprived of their unalienable rights? No, it does not. At the end of the day, I will say there is a judgment coming. Our Heavenly Father will be making the final judgment, but that judgment of them is not my place. But I'm not going to accept, I'm not going to tolerate, I'm not going to promote their lifestyle. I'm just not going to try to, to deprive them of their unalienable rights. Yep. That's what it is to be a conservative. But now that's not good enough. For them, they want us to love them, support them, promote them in their beliefs, regardless of our beliefs. They now believe that their belief system supersedes mine. And what they're trying to do is, or what they have done, is taken the force of government. They've got the force of government behind them to where, in the courts and even in companies, where if you don't toe the line, if you don't, clap and say Hercules, when somebody comes out the closet and says that they're gay or they're transgender or they're trans alien or whatever the heck they want to call themselves now, you risk your whole livelihood.
Yeah.
And so what's happening, Juan, and I'm sure you probably know this in corporate America, people are speaking in hushed tones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're a conservative, you have to be quiet.
And that goes back to your point, because you were talking about moderate Republicans and them not having an agenda. And a lot of this has been unleashed, I feel, on the culture because Republicans have not been defending our values. And not just the last 2 years. And I don't even want to, we can unpack the last 2 years all day, because, here you had a president who pretty much, you had a presidential candidate who was elected on, as far as I could tell, a mandate. He had some really heavy agenda items. He got elected on a mandate. You mean the voters in this country, and not just Republican voters, his support came from independents and a lot of Democrats as well. And these Republicans last 2 years didn't defend our values. years before that didn't defend our values, which have led us on this down spiral. You talk about all of these laws, the courts, some of the cultural attacks that we're receiving, from certain special interest groups. It doesn't necessarily have to be just the LGBT, but other progressive special interests. And because of that, we're in some serious enemy territory here. I mean, we're on our own 20-yard line, and Tom Brady's on the other side, and he's got the ball. And there's 2 minutes left in the game. That's the analogy that's the most appropriate analogy that I can think of. Our border is being flooded with illegals. Democrats are trying to replace domestic voters. We have court cases up the Yahoo going to the Supreme Court for some very serious issues. You have that census issue that's going to be heard by the Supreme Court. I mean, these are some very serious attacks, and the Republicans are just sitting there.
Well, my take on that, Juan, I think, and I was listening to Rush. I listen to Rush maybe once a week or so, just to kind of get caught up on some things. But I do agree with something he said, where it really comes down to the fact that there is two groups of people, or three groups of people, really. Mm-hmm. There were those who were staunch, who were Trump supporters. I mean, they're just flat out Trump supporters.
Yep.
And even among them, there are the extremists, right? Who I try to chastise them on occasion, like, hey, remember, Donald Trump is still a man.
Yeah. He's
still a public servant. Don't deify him.
Yeah.
Hold him accountable. There's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, who said essentially that it's dangerous to act as if the president is above reproach, that he cannot be and that's kind of paraphrasing his quote. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, listen, I like Donald Trump, but I'm not going to deify him. I'm going to keep him as the president in the proper position, which means I am suspicious of all government officials who have power, especially the level of power that the president has.
Yeah.
But as far as the three, there's, like I said, the first group I would call Trump supporters. The second group, there was a lot of people who wanted to get on board, especially elected officials, but they were thinking of their own self-interest, and they did not want to get too close because the shame is they actually believed the media, and or they thought there might be a lot of truth to what the media was saying or doing about this whole Russia collusion thing. And so they figured, I don't want to get too close to him because some of the stink might get on me, or and the shame is, if you're a Republican, you know how the left does things. I mean, you should have sniffed this out a long time ago. There's no way in heck that they would have the full force of the federal government, because that's what they've had. Here's the thing, not only have they had the full force of the federal government at their disposal with no time limit, no budget, they've been able to pretty much look at things that they had nothing to do with him, but they've been able to look at everything, as well as having the entire lamestream media.
Yeah.
And in 2+ years, y'all ain't found nothing.
Not a thing. And you got Manafort. They want to kill Manafort. They want him to go to jail for life. And then they got Roger Stone, and then they got what's this guy, the rat, Cohen. And everything they're getting them on, they're getting those guys all on like process crimes, none of which have anything to do with what the initial investigation was supposed to be, which was Russian collusion. So they've found zero evidence of Russian collusion, yet they're still looking. And I'm just sitting there going like, dude, how do you, I pointed this out, like, you had somebody, probably some blogger, did 5 or 10 minutes worth of work and was able to find out that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her campaign are guilty of campaign finance issues. Yeah, I saw that.
So just basically, like, it's like flipping open the phone book. Oh, look, here it is. It's right there in the right there for anybody who decides to look. You can see that this chick and her campaign were guilty of campaign finance. Imagine if we went through her background with the fine-tooth comb that the lamestream media and the Democrats have had looking through all of Donald Trump's information. Heck, imagine if they did a fraction, literally, if they did 10% of the investigation into Barack Obama they've done to Trump. There's no way Obama would have ever become president.
He wouldn't have got within 10 miles of that White House. I mean, you look at all of the shady connections, well-known, relationships with former terrorists raised by communists. I mean, you look at all of the dirt that they had on him. There is no way he wouldn't have been elected. And then when you look at his policy outcomes, what he really believed, the treatment of Israel and Palestine. You look at some of the foreign policy disasters that happened in Libya and other places. There is no way.
I'll touch on that. I wrote an article, which unfortunately we had a problem with our Unhyphenated America webpage. I mean, it's being recovered, but of course, for your listeners, the webpage is www.unhyphenated. It's UNHYPHENATED, unhyphenated America.org.
Yep.
And we had a problem with our website. It essentially crashed. The servers crashed. The people who were. And so a lot of articles, and I'm kicking myself because I did not back up my own articles somewhere else. So I literally had a heart attack when our IT people said what happened with the site. But one of the articles that I wrote, during the Obama administration was basically saying, using a sports analogy, and was saying, if the president were the head coach of your favorite, football team, what would you be saying?
Wow.
and because you have, at the end of the day, here's the thing: America is your team, right? We might have favorite players, we might even really like the coach. But at the end of the day, players come and go and coaches come and go. The team, the franchise, if you will, is who and what you support.
Yeah.
And so I talked about, and now I think his name was Tyrone Willingham, right? That Tyrone Willingham, there were people who said that Tyrone Willingham got a bad deal. I don't know if you remember him. He used to be he was like the first black head coach of Notre Dame, right? And there were people who said, and there were people who said, "Oh, he got a bad deal. If he were white, they would have kept him on. He would have had more of a chance." Because I think he coached at Stanford or one of those other California schools first, before he became the head coach of Notre Dame.
Yeah, he was at Stanford for sure.
Yeah. And he had a pretty decent season, which is why Stanford's a school with high academic credentials, which is why he was able to, get recruited to be the head coach of Notre Dame. But he had 2 really crappy seasons at Notre Dame. And so, but then, okay, fine. You could sit there and complain that, he was treated unfairly. But the thing is, he then went on to be the head coach. He was hired at Washington. And I believe he had lost every game.
Yeah,
at Washington.
I remember that.
And Washington has a very storied history. It's a very proud program.
Yeah, he was there for 5 years.
I don't even think he was there 5 years.
Really?
But at the end of the day, he had a terrible record, and they fired him.
Yeah.
So the point I make with that one is, okay, he's black. He was qualified, right? I mean, he had been a head coach at some facility. He was qualified. Great, you give him a chance. But his performance was subpar, so he got fired.
Mm-hmm.
And for people, they might try to say, oh, well, maybe they fired him because he was black. No, they fired him because of his performance. If you're a Notre Dame fan, you wanted him gone because this is Notre Dame and the high expectations are of the franchise, of the team, that they perform, that they should be challenging for the national championship. But they were nowhere near it, so they let him go.
Yeah.
It's not about racism. It's about, at the end of the day, it's about the expectation of performance. And he didn't perform. And Obama, as a president, didn't perform.
Not at all.
And, you know, if you are a fan of the team, you want him gone, regardless of the color of his skin. You know, people can sit there and say the same thing, like, oh, well, it wasn't fair to Ty Willingham because, you know, when he took over the franchise, they were already falling behind and failing and so on and so forth. Okay, that's fine. But you applied for the job. You know, I mean, that's it, is that you applied for the job, and when you were given the opportunity, you failed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, with the economy, I point out about President Trump, he didn't have to be a genius to, quote unquote, fix the economy. The only thing President Trump did was like, okay, I'm going to take the shackles off of the economy.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut taxes. I'm going to reduce regulation. And the economy is going to make it do what it do all by itself.
It's simple. Obama could have actually done that. And even with the horrible Obamacare and even with, you know, a lot of other bad policies, he would have had a decent economy without the taxes and the regulations. To your point, we're talking about the DNC and we're talking about the new Congress people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it seems like recently there's been revelations about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her relationship with the Justice
Project.
Democrats.
Yeah, Justice Democrats, yep.
Basically, and look, I went through the video thoroughly, and I did a little bit of my own research and vetted some of the information. It seems like a very plausible theory.
It's very damning. Yes, it is. It is not just pie in the sky, total fabrication. Look, it's not the Russian dossier, right? You know, it's not, Trump hired prostitutes to urinate in the bed because Obama slept there. It's none of that. It's like, well, you can look, all the accusations they made, you can see those people from, what is it called? Project Democracy? What is it called again?
The Justice Democrats.
Yeah, Justice Democrats. I'm sorry. You can see the people from the Justice Democrats speaking, and then boom, lo and behold, you see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez parroting what they're saying. And it makes sense. The reason why that young lady, and I'm saying young lady to be charitable, the reason why that young lady will not engage in a debate with anybody because she does not have a brain of her own.
Yeah.
She doesn't know any of the policy issues. She doesn't, and I've talked about this before, and I don't know if you saw this, that, she graduated cum laude from Boston University. Did you know that?
Yeah, I know. I knew that.
But do you know about the credibility of Boston University?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, the U.S. News and World Report, for your listeners, I'll explain to them. U.S. News and World Report is probably the most well-known magazine that kind of ranks the colleges in America. And there's over 4,000 accredited colleges in America, and they do a ranking every year on which ones are the best. Boston University is the 42nd ranked college in America, right? So basically it's a top 1% college.
Yeah.
So it's the 42nd ranked college in America, and she actually, believe it or not, graduated with honors, cum laude, with degrees in international relations and economics, which I know it has to be mind-blowing to people, the idea that this person has, a minor in economics.
Yeah.
Because she knows nothing about economics.
Well, when you think about it, it's mind-blowing and it's not. I mean, because we're talking about a group of people that are ideologically feud. I mean, look at Obama. Obama had a law degree, some of the best schools. Now, he didn't defend the Constitution. He used his law degree and his background to undermine the Constitution. And so it could be a similar instance with AOC. They see look, capitalism and the system speaks for itself. This system has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system in the world, especially living here in America. And you see us you see other nations trying to duplicate this system across the world. Look at, the changes in India. Look at China. Even though they're communists, they are purely capitalist when it comes to their economy. Look at Hong Kong, some of these other places. So she knows that it works. She just disagrees with it and would use whatever knowledge she has to undermine the system. That's just the way I see it. It makes sense. It's a laughable punchline that she has an economics degree, but yet all you hear coming out of her mouth is economic illiteracy. But it also makes sense that, maybe there's something sinister there. Maybe that she's using that knowledge, to undermine the system.
I don't even think she really has knowledge. Honestly, I don't say that to be mean. I mean, honestly, Juan, my experience has been, I've met a lot of young men and women in the Metro DC area who've gone to really good schools.
Yep.
University of Maryland, George Mason University, I've met a young lady who went to Cornell, another one went to Lehigh. So, reputable schools who graduate with degrees in economics.
Yeah.
And I've asked them a few questions. For example, I asked them, what do they know about, I asked them, do they know anything about Thomas Sowell? None of them know anything about Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. What about Milton Friedman? Never heard of Milton Friedman. One of the young folks that I met who went to school at George Mason, I asked them, I said, well, are you familiar with Professor Walter Williams? And they're like, nope. I'm like, okay, Professor Walter Williams is a distinguished scholar.
A legend.
And he teaches at George Mason right here in Fairfax County. And you ain't never heard of Walter Williams. And I'm just sitting there going, then I asked, okay, what about, Austrian economics? What do you know about? I don't know anything about Austrian. They're like Australian. I'm like, no, Austrian, as in Europe, not Australia, the continent. Austria, and I said, then they're like, okay, Adam Smith. They're like, oh yeah, every single one. I'm like, yeah, we touched on Adam Smith. That's the whole riches of nations. I said, no, it's wealth of nations, but okay, close enough. Literally, that is what. And these young men and women go to good schools. As my boy Robert would say, we're not talking about hook boogie nail salon and barber school. We're talking about good quality schools. You got to have good grades and so on and so forth. But yet they're being educated, supposedly, allegedly, in degrees in economics, and they don't know anything. Yeah. All they know is Keynesian economics.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you sound like me because I do the same thing with law students. Because I'm in New York. It's a city of lawyers. And I'm like, yeah, Federalist number 10. And it's the same thing. Well, we don't really, the Federalist papers, they're not binding. That's non-law. It doesn't really count. What matters is president and cases and the Constitution.
That is exactly what I complain about with lawyers. I'm like, that's why I don't care about your law degree.
Yeah.
Because I know that, like you said, your law degree is not constitutionally based. Your law degree, as you said, is precedent based.
Yeah.
And the same way with President Obama. He knows nothing about the Constitution. So for them to say he was a constitutional law professor, I'm like, look, I claim BS to that.
I think he actually does, because the thing about Obama is he knew how to he knew how to get around it. You know, he pushed us beyond our limits in terms of what is acceptable, in terms of the separations of power. So I think he actually knew about it. You know, you knew he was. Those of us who had done our homework and research on Obama knew that he was schooled in the Alinsky method, and he understood the boundaries that were set by the founders. He also had a totally screwed up, I want to say a totally misguided view of Abraham Lincoln's presidency too, because he viewed it as the blueprint on how he would govern. Lincoln being a wartime president, you know, there's a lot of scholars, you know, they debate Lincoln and they talk about how he, you know, shut down habeas corpus and trampled on some liberties. But he was literally at war. And what they miss about Lincoln is, you know, at the end, Lincoln gave the power back. He wasn't trying to codify things into law that would trample on liberties. He used emergency powers and he gave them back. He did what he did to preserve the Union, to preserve federalism. And so
exactly,
I see and just like you're saying with these economists, I'm starting to see some of the same things. Paul Krugman, you know, he's you look at some of his theories, he's been wrong for how many years now?
You know, I mean, seriously, Paul Krugman is so wrong consistently on so many issues that, like, if he was the weatherman, he'd have been fired. Like, they would be calling for his head if he was your local weatherman, because essentially this guy is calling for snow in the summertime. He's calling for 90-degree weather in the wintertime. You know, that's essentially what he's doing. And people are like, yes, but he has he has a Nobel Prize. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, listen, Obama has a Nobel Prize also, and we know he got that prize because of the potential, mm-hmm. which is just amazing. Like, they literally admitted they felt he had the potential, so we're going to give him the Nobel Prize, which is supposed to go to people based on their results. But because of the potential he had, but then what did he do? He has the record of he's bombed more countries than any other president.
Yep.
You know, so yeah, he got the Nobel. He should give that Nobel Prize back. You know.
So we're talking about Democrats. Just to delve in, I had this dovetails into what I wanted to. I want to talk about postmodernism in a little bit more detail. I know I'm not going to keep you terribly long, but I want to talk about, because you're a big picture guy.
Yep.
And you see the big picture. And I started studying postmodernism about 5 or 6 years ago when I started really reading David Horowitz.
Yes.
Because he's like, to me, he's for me, for my own personal study, he's like my godfather of postmodernism. And, you know, he talks about, I have his whole series on the Black Book of the Left, you know, and their tactics. And, you know, as you know, he was at one point a leftist.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this playing out? Because postmodernism, you know, it's, to me, and just when I think about postmodernism and studying what it is and what it's doing now currently, I just can't think of no other word other than just pure evil. It's like a cancer. So how do we get this how do we flush this cancer out? How do we give chemo to the body to flush this cancer of postmodernism out of the body politic and try to restore this republic?
You and I are doing it right now by exposing it to the cleansing light of day. Mm-hmm. Being unafraid to talk about it. You know, like I said, people have been speaking in hushed tones instead of just flat out saying, hey, this is what's going on and this is wrong. This is evil. We need to talk about this. And it's like, even I was having a conversation with my niece, and just this, like, the whole LGBT issue, right? At the end of the day, what people want you to believe, and that's well, okay, let me take a step back and say this. I started doing my research on the left, and I actually saw a phenomenal documentary done, believe it or not, by PBS. It's called Heaven on Earth, The Rise and Fall of Socialism. It's a 3-hour-long special. I watched it on YouTube, and I've watched it probably 5 or 6 times since then, but I actually liked it so much I bought it on DVD. But Heaven on Earth, The Rise and Fall of Socialism, and it goes back and even explores how socialism took root or came to America in 1825 with British industrialist Robert Owen, right? And the most telling thing, like, a lot of people, this documentary actually tied together the pieces. So to me, if you want to understand postmodernism, then you have to understand what this video laid out, because the 3 tenets of Robert Owen's little merry band of socialists, right? Number 1 was the end of private property rights, not in order of importance, but like 1, the end of private property rights. 2, the end of traditional family structures, nuclear family structures, right? And the third thing was the end of traditional religion, specifically Christianity. And now these were the 3 tenets that they laid out basically 200 years ago in 1825. And as I've explained this to many people, I asked them, do those 3 things sound familiar? Have you heard or seen those kind of things being acted out at any point in time in the last 5, 10, 20 years? The end of traditional religion, right? And they did not have a problem with Hinduism, Taoism, Islam, none of those. They didn't have a problem with that. For them, the issue was Christianity. So ask yourself, has there been an attack on Christianity in America in the last, 10, 15, 20 plus years? I think so. The next thing was the end of traditional family structures. Has there been an attack on the traditional nuclear family in the last 20 or so years? I think so. Has there been an attack on private property rights? I think so. See, here's the thing. Robert Owen, his experiment failed miserably, even though they had a turnkey town, which is amazing to me. Like, literally, they took over an existing town. So they didn't take it over, it was sold to them. They purchased an existing town, over 100 buildings. The land was already cultivated. There was a river nearby. Everything that they would need to survive in 1825 was there, but yet in a 2-year period, this merry band of socialists were starving. And it had nothing to do with the natural resources. It was absolutely because of the ideology of the people there, which is why I say the postmodernists, the socialists, the leftists, you could lock them inside of a super Walmart, and if you come back 6 months to a year later, they'd all be dead.
Yeah.
Now think, what is it? What's in a super Walmart? Everything. I mean, everything. What do they not have at a super Walmart? You got food, shelter, entertainment. I mean, the worst case scenario in a super Walmart is if the power goes out, then that means the groceries, the fresh produce and stuff like that, or the frozen stuff will start to go bad, and it's going to stink to beat all heck. But otherwise, I mean, my God, you could, 100 people could live inside of a super Walmart for months on end with all the food, the canned goods and everything like that, but yet even if you turn the power off, there's coats and blankets and stuff, so you're gonna survive, but not with lemons, because they died or they starved in New Harmony, Indiana. Wow. So this is not news. This is there's nothing new underneath the sun.
Yep.
Right. So that's why, to me, you have to be a student of history. So when people come up and they try to promote this crap, you're like, dude, I've seen that before. There's nothing new.
I ran into postmodernism. You're talking about back in 1825. I think I ran into postmodernism when I started studying first. I was studying kind of black radical literary scholars.
Mm-hmm.
I studied. I ended up studying. I ended up doing some research on Derek Bell, right? Derek Bell and the critical race theory, and from there I went. Tried to get to the root of where did this come from in terms of this theoretical framework. Just where did this really come from, and I traced it back to the Frankfurt School.
Oh yeah, brother. We could talk forever about the Frankfurt School.
The Frankfurt School, Theodore Adorno, and the critical theory. And what I've taken away from progressivism in general, and when you look at progressivism and how Black Americans have adopted progressivism, almost exclusively, when you look at the numbers, how we vote, policy beliefs, so forth. I went from Derek Bell, I went back to the Frankfurt School, and I started to notice a pattern between minorities and some of these theories. You look at the communist movement. There was a heavy intellectual communist movement in the 60s, and you had radical Black activists adopting communism, Black Panthers and so forth. But then intellectually too, and you can there's a breakdown of the Black family and the Black communities in between these policies that were passed during the 60s and some of these theories that have been kind of pushed out there into some of these institutions. So I can kind of see the pattern. And so that's what led me. That's how far I go back in terms of studying postmodernism. I didn't know what the Frankfurt School was for a while until I really started, I started to kind of digest some of these Black, like I said, some of these Black radical scholars. I did study Cornell West for a while. But Derek Bell really got me on kind of the postmodernism train because, they've infiltrated our institutions. They've turned the language against us. You talk about liberals and the politically correct left and how they take the language and they just kind of co-opt it and they turn the language against us.
But Juan, I'll tell you, here's the thing about the left. They begin everything with a faulty premise.
Yep.
And so what they're, if you start by accepting their premise, then you're going to end up, kind of stuck in the morass. You're going to end up stuck in the mud with them. Here's the reality. America is exceptional because our foundational ideas are exceptional.
Yep.
In the history of the world.
Yeah.
See, one of the things I always point out, and I tell people, we're going to run with another sports analogy. When we talk about the greatness of America, right, one of the things that people do, they make this straw man where they point out a flaw.
Mm-hmm.
And since they're able to point out that one flaw in America, that means America's not perfect. And since America's not perfect, it can't be good.
Yeah.
And since it's not good, it certainly can't be great. They spike the football, they scored a touchdown, they win, they do their touchdown dance. But that's a ridiculous idea because perfection has never been a requirement for greatness.
Yeah.
And so let's understand, when we understand that perfection has never been a requirement for greatness, then let's ask a few questions. Who and what are you comparing America to? I always go back to, my hero, that dude, Thomas Sowell. He always asked those three questions. Compared to what, at what cost, and where is your hard data? So when you criticize the United States of America, I'm like, who are you comparing it to criticize America?
Yeah.
Because going to your boy Eric Bell, at the end of the day, the history of the world, the real true history of the world, is one of conquest.
Yeah.
It's only literally been in the last 50 or so years where conquest has fallen out of favor. Because throughout the history of the world, notice the map has constantly changed. The world map has constantly changed because one nation state or group of people has constantly been conquering another one. And the rules to the game have always been this: winner takes all. So it's only because we have progressed, and what it is that they hate the left, they hate the West rather, but they don't understand, or they're not acknowledging the fact that it is Western values, which to me is the confluence of three things. Western values, or American values more specifically, are the confluence of, one, Judeo-Christian morality, two, Greco-Roman philosophy, and which is logic and reason, right, and three, Anglo-Saxon law, which essentially can be boiled down to the fact that the king is not above the law, that there is a lawgiver, and it is the creator, which is why our founders and framers in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, rather, made it clear that, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it made it clear that you don't have a special right just because you have a title of being a king or a duke or congresswoman or whatever. You're a human being. You are created the same as I do. We all have unalienable rights. That idea, that confluence of those three ideas, is unique in the history of the world. And so it didn't happen overnight.
Yep.
I mean, that's the thing, is that people think that we signed the Declaration of Independence and then 12 years later or whatever, we signed the Constitution, and how come things weren't perfect overnight? Do you not understand that the institution of slavery is a worldwide, multicultural institution that still exists to this day? Because it's still going. The trans-Saharan slave trade, the Arabic Muslims are still running. It's still going on, but nobody wants to talk about that. They'd still rather talk about what Americans did 200 years ago, which anyway.
Without mentioning that, you talk about Western society, you talk about, white, Anglo-Saxon, Catholics, and what the West got right was slavery ended in the West. It's still going on in Arab countries. It's still going on in the Middle East. It's still going on in parts of Asia. It's still going on in certain parts of Latin America. When you talk about sex slavery, sex traffic.
But why? Why is it going on? That's the question. Why is it going on in all these other nations?
My quick answer to that, because when I look back at the ending of slavery in the West, I bring it back to the values. There were, even though for a period of time, and there's been some, I don't shy away from this debate about terrible things being done in the name of Christianity, because there has been, but there has been terrible things done in the name of all religion. So it's not the religion, it's the practitioner. But I believe, and this is just my personal belief, that because of the moral standards of the religions in the West, that ended slavery. People evolved. People evolved. We had, you talk about, we had our Holy Bible, we had our, we had our holy books for the Jews. we had moral obligations that we weren't living up to, and over time we evolved. There were a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved in ending the institution of slavery through Reconstruction, through civil rights. You look at Africa, look at African apartheid. I think the West got it right because we are, like our founders said, a moral and religious people. How we started out when we founded this country, a moral and religious people wrote those founding documents, and they knew that it would take a moral and religious people to keep this republic in place. And so, which is why we're losing it, because we're moving away from morality. We're moving away from God. We're moving away from religion. I think it's because of religion, because of the faith of the people in the West, that the institutions of slavery were ended.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, at the end of the day, people don't see, because they don't teach this in schools. Why do they not teach this in schools? First of all, 99.9% of public school teachers are ignorant.
Yep.
Why are they ignorant? Because the people who are teaching them in colleges are ignorant. Actually, the people who are teaching the future teachers are wicked.
Yeah.
They have an agenda.
Because they're indoctrinating.
Yeah. So they're indoctrinating. So you got these young men and women who actually have a heart. They believe in education. Mm-hmm. So they go to college. And when they're in college, when they're away from mom and dad, when professors have access to them 24/7, the professors are indoctrinating these kids. And so you graduate with this skewed view of the world that you've been thoroughly indoctrinated. And what do? You get your first teaching job. And what do? You start teaching the same crap to kids that you were taught. So I had a chance a few years back when Glenn Beck was still on Fox News. And he had David Barton from Wall Builders on, and he did one of his Black Heroes of the Revolution. And I was on that show.
You know what's funny? It's funny. I was supposed to be there.
Okay.
We would have met. We would have met there.
A couple other people.
Yeah, we would have met. Me and you would have met on that show. I was supposed to be there. I was sick as a dog that week, and I couldn't make it. But anyway, go to your story. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. So I mean, we travel in those same circles. But I mean, it was they gave me the microphone, and I said, listen, I'm a little angry about this. I'm angry because I went to what I believe are generally some of the best schools available, which is the Department of Defense Dependent Schools. But yet, and I love history, but at no point were any of these stories told to me.
Yeah.
Even I literally, not even if I did my own research, since I did not know what direction to go, it never occurred to me, because here's the narrative that they teach us in school. You and I, as descendants of, the slaves, we were savages in Africa. Mm-hmm. We were a couple white boys in a rowboat and sailboat threw nets over us and our ancestors and dragged us into the boat and took us across the Atlantic. And then we became slaves in America, and then the Civil War happened, and we were freed. But then we became welfare babies. That's the narrative. Literally, you can summarize and say that's what we've been taught to believe about ourselves. No one mentions the fact that there were a sizable percentage of free blacks. I mean, we heard about Crispus Attucks, right? Everybody hears about Crispus Attucks. Oh, the first person to be killed in the Boston Massacre was a black man, right? But they don't mention the fact that blacks were free blacks. Not everybody was free. I'm not sitting there. I'm not minimizing slavery, but I'm bringing perspective. There were free blacks in America. They not only were free, but they also served in elected positions and voted.
Yep.
Because everybody acts like no black person ever voted until after the 14th Amendment and 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But no, blacks were free, voting and serving in elected positions before the Emancipation Proclamation and subsequently the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments.
Yeah.
Nobody told us that. That changes the narrative.
Yeah, it does.
They want us to believe, Juan, that after slavery, since the evil white man broke up our families, that's the reason why we're so dysfunctional today. And everybody's running around repeating that. But if you talk to people in our parents' generation, even though they're echoing that, you ask them, they'll be like, well, yeah, actually everybody that I grew up with had a mom and dad. My family growing up in Detroit, they'll tell you, yeah, literally, because my parents are in their mid-60s, everybody grew up with a mom and dad when they were growing up in Detroit. Literally, they knew you were the one person on the block that you didn't have a daddy. As opposed to today, I do mentoring of these young men and women, and literally nobody grew up with a mother and a father in the home. You talk to these young black men and women today, so many of them, it's just their mama.
Yep.
Or it's their dad, but they might go, oh yeah, I heard so-and-so, their parents are married, they grew up with a mother and a father in the home, but the black child growing up with a mother and a father in a home is a zebra, it's a unicorn rather nowadays, where it was the norm, but we don't even talk about it. Mm-hmm. Because you got people out there trying to act as if the single parent household is a result of slavery. No, the single parent household rate is a result of, as you talk, postmodernism, is a result of leftist, regressive, socialist ideology being turned into public policy in the form of the Great Society and the welfare state.
And I blame that. I blame the welfare state. I also blame bad economic policies that increase the cost of living for American families. I mean, those play a key factor into it too. Not that we should have housewives. I know that, look, this is a different time. A lot of, women want careers. I know it's a different time, but what separated this generation from a lot of others, it was much more affordable for having a parent in the home, which created, some more stability in the home for the kids. And you look at, I was looking at some statistics, I think 2 nights ago, and it talked about, the it talked about people that were making less than $24,000 a year, mm-hmm. and whether they're in 2-parent homes or not. If they're in 2-parent homes, they're likely to be upwardly mobile. If they're not, they're going to stay there or maybe do even a little worse. And so, we talk about leftist progressive policies. We talk about the cost of living increases due to bad economic policies. And, I almost feel bad for this generation because I grew up, we grew up, economically it was pretty, if you look at the 90s, you look at the 80s, economically things were pretty decent. Things were pretty decent. There was a lot of upward mobility. There were a lot of industrial jobs here. And there were more people with 2 parents in the home. And so, postmodernism and, bad crony capitalist economic policies, I think have really, led to some of these young people getting left behind. You have, I do this thing with homeless teens now. You have, a lot of homeless youth in America. They don't have either parent. That's something that, that not a lot of people are talking about. Man, Chris, I don't want to keep you all night, man. I could talk to you all night, literally.
I got to get going here shortly, but yeah, I mean, like I said, this is the kind of stuff I can talk about all day and night. Yeah.
Where can we find you? Can you give my audience your site again?
Yes, the website itself is www.unhyphenatedamerica.org. Excuse me, that's unhyphenatedamerica.org. So it's UNHYPHEN. Now I got to spell it. ENATED. So unhyphenatedamerica.org. And you can just find me on Facebook. That's where I'm a lot more active in terms of what's going on up to the moment, on just looking for Unhyphenated America. And you'll find me, and definitely, man, if you, anybody who's listening to Juan's program, send me a message on Facebook. I'd love to interact with you. And, it's always cool catching up with you, Juan, but it's the first time I've been on your show, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your guests.
No, thanks for coming, man. It's been a pleasure. This is the best interview ever. Don't
say that, man. You had C.L. Bryant on before, man. I don't want anybody thinking I'm trying to upstage anybody.
Well, you're on Fox too, so you're gonna, when is your next Fox gig?
I actually don't know. I send them treatments of, stuff that kind of comes to my mind, and then they reach out to me when they want me to come on. So that's how that works.
Well, I'll post your site on my Facebook and my website. Thanks for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. You have a good day.
Hey, thanks a lot.
This is The Cure.